All right, welcome everybody. It's exactly 6 o'clock on the dot. So we're going to go ahead and get started for our March 1st meeting of the Polk City Parks Commission. I hereby call this meeting to order. Could you call roll, Josh? You just hopped on. Maybe we should give Josh a hot second.
No, do it now.
All right, quick roll call. Bentley.
Wave, just wave.
Sorry.
Hayland.
Here.
Converse.
Here.
Carson.
Here.
Delaney.
Here.
Otis.
Here.
And I'm here as well.
All right, thank you so much. We also have a couple of guests. Jason, do you want to introduce Matt and Jim?
I need you to approve the minutes from February 1st.
Oh, okay.
First.
I didn't know if you wanted to introduce them and then come back to it. I apologize.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Okay, in the email Jason sent out with this link, there was also an attachment of the minutes from February 1st. Do I have a motion and a second for approval?
A motion.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, awesome. Audience items, it does not look like we have any audience items currently present. So we're going to move on to step number 5, which is the Regional Park Master Plan and Stakeholder Meeting.
Sure. All right, now I'll introduce these guys. So we've got Matt and Jim from Confluence. They were awarded the master plan for our regional park project on the north side of town. So tonight is the Parks Commission stakeholder meeting. These gentlemen have already met with 5 other groups. We're saving the best for last, so put on a good show, folks. But no, I'm going to turn the floor over to Matt and Jim. They're going to kind of facilitate here for the next hour, I suppose. And I'm just going to be a fly on the wall running the Zoom and the phones. So yeah, Matt, Jim, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm Matt Carlisle. I'm a principal at Confluence. Jim, you can introduce yourself really quickly.
Jim Host. I'm an associate at Confluence, and I'll be working with Matt on this project.
Well, thanks for having us. Let's start off with that. And second of all, I see friendly faces. So I know we've already met with several of you in this process. So I think you know a little bit about what we're talking about. At the same time, I think we also want to make sure everybody has a different lens in every meeting, or the community center, or whatever the answer is. We want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to talk about each of those pieces. And I think with the other groups, the other one I think we need to make sure and talk about is, you know, this is a piece of property that seems really big, but there's a lot of pieces and a lot of interest in this space, and fitting all the pieces and parts into one space is difficult. And ultimately that's what our job is, right? We're here to do that. But at some point, you know, all the pieces of the puzzle aren't going to fit there, and we need to figure out what the priorities are, and then figure out what the phasing is for them, and then have reasons behind all of that. So the intention is we have this series of stakeholder meetings, and then we're going to go back and design, and then go back to the steering committee. I know that there's a couple of you on the steering committee as well, but the intention then is once we get all the feedback, and I think this is our last meeting, once we gather all that feedback, we start designing things. We come up with options on what pieces of the puzzle fit where. We're going to look at the site that we're in front of us today, but we're also looking at all the other parks that are out there. You know, before the snow happened last fall, we did get out and took some photos and visited each and every park in town. And then that includes the sports complex. So, you know, these meetings, we've talked about the existing sports complex on the core property. We've been to that, we understand that. I think by default, that becomes part of this project as well. You know, in talking about the pieces and where they all fit, we have to look at that space as well, even though the scope didn't exactly tell us to. In order to do it justice and give you the answers I think you need, it sort of forces us to make a quick look at how that all works too. So with that, I mean, the intention is we want you to talk. It's not really about us talking. By default, we will talk because we like to, me in particular, as Jim looks at me funny. But the intention is that you talk about your community. We're here to help out. We can apply all the knowledge we have from elsewhere. We can talk about pitfalls. We can, you know, play devil's advocate. You know, it's our job to challenge you to think differently than you have before about this space. So with that, I mean, I think I know about what everybody's history is here. Those of you that we don't, or that didn't attend another meeting, maybe we could quickly say who you are and where you live and what's your connection. So I know Monica, I don't think I saw you, or maybe Ashley, I don't remember if you were at a meeting.
Yep, I was at the initial meeting.
Okay.
I just got
No
home
mask,
from the
like-
gym and do not look the same, I'm sure. Steve is a part of the Community Visionings project,
Yep.
and
Yep, I met
Josh
with Steven.
is and Josh is the head of the Little League. So I'm gonna go Monica and then Nick and then Kelly and Amy will finish up with you.
Sounds good. Monica Converse. I've lived in Polk City for about 5.5 years now, coming up on 6 years, surprisingly. I'm also a member of the Community Visioning with a few of these folks. So Steve and I are kind of taking that to the next phase of implementation. So hopefully we can keep the ball rolling on that. I am a civil engineer by trade. So I got that experience, I guess.
Cool.
And I'm a parent of 2 small kids, so I think I will probably look at a lot of this through the lens of being a parent. Not so far, my kids are only 7 and 2, and or 3, and they're not real athletic. So I'll be interested in other amenities besides the sports complexes through my lens, I guess. But
Sure, thank you.
Mhm.
And then Nick, Kelly, Amy.
So I actually already met with these guys through the community visioning as well. So they've heard most of my spiel. So I'm going to hand it off.
All right,
Thanks, Nick.
Kelly, then Amy.
All right, my name's Kelly Holland. So I have lived in Polk City for about 7.5 years. My background is kind of in community health. I have 3 kids where they're active in sports in the community. So I've always had an interest in outdoor activities, being able to go to the gym, things like that, have those open gym opportunities for our family to be active together, and just that they have the field space and opportunities, and that we have some of those amenities that we go to other communities to enjoy here in our community.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Go ahead, Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy Bentley. I've lived in Polk City about 5 years or just over 5 years. My current position is with the Harkin Institute for Public Policy, and I do a lot of disability work there, so might be interested in connecting on some of that with this. Previously worked at the Iowa DNR and then the National Program for Playground Safety before that. I've been on the Parks Commission maybe for like 4 years. I was on the review committee for your proposal, so saw some of that initial work, but otherwise I'm excited to be here.
All right. Well, thank you. Jim, do you want to pull up the plan just so we can talk about that really quick and talk about some of the site analysis stuff that for some of the folks that didn't see it or haven't talked to us before, just want to show
Getting a
this.
message that says the host disabled participant screen sharing.
Jim, I just made you the host. That should change.
Okay, there we go. Everybody seeing that?
Nice. Well, hopefully everybody knows the site a little bit. I think I saw heads nod, by the way. Everybody can see that. So Jim's got the cursor there, the little hand. So the area in the green is obviously the parcel, the 57 acres that the city owns or has the rights to. And then the red area you see there is obviously the North Polk School District. We have recently met with North Polk. We've talked through kind of their thoughts and things for the process. And then the other big player is Nat Properties. So all of the numbers you see around there, you know, I think now there's 210 lots shown in that location. But we met with them and they're very open to discussion of how we use those spaces, where we have connections, whether it's pedestrian connections or vehicular connections. They're kind of willing to discuss all of those things, which is great. So those are the red arrows you see there. Those are sort of where they're currently slated to be. But we know even right now that some of those are going to adjust. And then the blue dashed lines you see on the plan right now are major drainage basins. So if you look at the slopes there, all that water is kind of draining to the south. So there's 3 different points where it flows through the Nat property to the south and down to the river or down to the creek, depending on how you want to slice it. And And those locations are critical. And as of right now, as you can see, they just go through housing lots. Nat Properties knows those need to adjust anyway, and they're willing to work with us on those discussions. But the key thing here is there's a pretty big divide if you look at the properties. On the west-hand side there, Jim, if you want to trace that north-south blue line there, as you go north and south with the blue line.
Oh, here.
There, yeah. So the big ravine that kind of goes through the middle there, that sort of divides the space up a little bit. So the flat area that we can create, and let's be honest, the rest of this isn't flat by any means. If you look at the contour lines that are on there, there's quite a bit of slope to this. But as we try to carve off some area for sports type activities, it's more than likely going to be on the eastern 2/3 of the site, probably not the western quarter. Certainly you can do lots of grading and you can make things happen. I just, looking at the land, that's what it's sort of telling us. And then the other piece of this is that we were given is the trail connection, which we know is extremely important to the community. Lot 26, roughly up on the north side there, that's where we think the trail is going to come into this site. And then we know that we need to connect it from point A, which is lot 26 or 184, down to the southern corner where Jim's cursor is of the school property. And then it will continue on west all the way down to 3rd Street, somewhere in that alignment there. And we verified that with the school, we verified that with the city. And those are really sort of our givens as we go through this process. There's been lots of talk of whether there's a through street. So the arrow right below where it says 932 Jim, there's some thought that there's a connection from that point all the way south down connecting to that roadway. But the city's also given us the liberty to have the discussions of where that road goes or how that goes through there, and maybe even the potential for that not being a road. I think there's all sorts of discussions that can be had that might make some sense to make this land more contiguous and not have a road go through there. But let's just see where the plan takes us as it evolves. So I think that's all the parameters and all the things that we've talked about to date that gives you kind of the scope of the property, what we're doing, where we're at. You guys know your current athletic facility, and you know that everything's kind of crammed in there. We do know that you have a new, concessions building that hasn't been there very long, that's in pretty good shape. But we do know that as it moves here, there's going to be some sort of sports facility, and wherever there's a sports facility, you need to have water to irrigate it. So one of the things we learned early on is the water supply here isn't the best in talking with Public Works. So we're likely going to have to build a pond on this site in order to irrigate the fields that we're going to build, no matter whether it's baseball or soccer or softball, we're going to have water to irrigate it. And to do that, the more than likely location for a pond is somewhere in that southwest corner, down there where all those blue lines kind of converge, makes the most sense to grab the most water for the site. So I lied. I told you about one more parameter that I wasn't going to before I let you talk. I'm sorry. But with that, I think those are all the different pieces. Obviously, all the meetings we've had, we've heard different things from each group. We've asked each group to be selfish and talk about how it affects that group personally or you personally. Obviously, this board comes at things a little differently, where you guys do all that kind of comes with different perspectives. The groups we met with previously, a lot of times were on the one issue. They were all, part of the Little League board or the soccer board or community visioning or whatever. This group's a little more diverse. So we make sure we just want to know what your thoughts are, and we want you to share your thoughts so that you can help Jim and I form the plans that we come back to with the steering committee. So with that, I guess the first question I have is, if you had your ideal thoughts, what does Polk City need? Really open-ended question, but I don't want to force the conversation one way or another. So I guess if you guys are willing to talk, we're willing to listen. And if the conversation lags, we'll ask more difficult questions. Ashley, since you seem to be the leader, I'll toss it back to you to kickstart if nobody else wants to.
All right. If you want to stop sharing your screen, that might facilitate a little conversation. And if we have something that we want to add there, we certainly can.
I agree.
And is that document available online anywhere, or is there the potential for you sharing that document, or at least that picture that you just had up in the chat for people to have access to?
Yeah.
I'll leave that to Jason. I mean, we absolutely have it and can share it. I just don't know what the process is and how you want to share it, Jason.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Let me check on my end if that's something that can be made public until, well, okay. I guess we showed it on a Parks Commission video, so it's public. But yeah, I mean, I'm
not talking necessarily about the whole document, Jason. I'm talking about just that image in case people need to reference it and any comments that may have. I guess we
Yep.
could just pull it back up. Okay, I'm just going to table what I just said. I'm sorry. That's unnecessary.
All good. No,
All right.
we want to be open and
So,
whatever you've got, we'll share. As long as
Okay.
Jason says we
So
can.
I just want to mention that, again, this is parks as a whole. So try to think as diverse as you can as far as community needs and who our community members are. What we have for parks, we've kind of had our own parks dream meeting. So this is a chance for us to insert some of that maybe is slated for other parks, so that you think would be a good idea or bad idea to include in this park space as well.
Everybody doesn't have to speak at once.
I think a key here is going to be having diversity, just to make sure that it appeals to all people and we can get support of it. So I know sports fields is going to take up a lot of space, and then have other things like parking and, just additional things that take up even more of the site. But, with that natural ravine there, maybe there's an opportunity more on the west side to do some sort of kind of natural outdoor recreation, maybe some walking trails or an outdoor classroom kind of thing, since it's so close to the school, or just, obviously trail connections, those kinds of things. Butterfly gardens. I'm just kind of throwing out things that might appeal to the masses. I know personally, one thing I'd like to see somewhere is like a splash pad. A pool's probably a little bit too much to ask, but I think a splash pad would be loved by a lot of people, especially with a lot of young families in town. And then probably not at this space, but I know one other thing that a lot of people would probably like would be a dog park, but that also takes up a lot of space. So it's probably a conflicting interest with some of these other uses.
Depends. I think I asked this question of a couple different groups, but when you say dog park, what does dog park mean to you?
Place to let them run.
I agree, but the question is the size of it, because if you think dog park, obviously there's many different sizes, everywhere from West Des Moines is acres upon acres. The one in Ankeny is fairly large, but it has a small dog section, and then you have the one just off of 235 by Walmart down there that's pretty tiny. I think it's a discussion of, when you say dog park, how big of dog park are we talking? And it may not fit here. You're right that there's certain things I think make sense that it wouldn't be here. But as we talk about this thing, is it a small dog park or a large dog park in your mind? What does the community need or want?
Yeah, I think a small one would be fine. I mean, that's what we used to live in, Beaverdale area, before we moved to Polk City. So that's the one that we would frequent. And it seemed that, I didn't know any different because that was the only dog park we had gone to. So it seemed adequate at that time. Again, I don't know if that makes sense at this park necessarily, but if you're looking at park-wide inventory, maybe it's just something to take into consideration.
No, absolutely. I appreciate the comment, and tonight's your night to dream.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to crush your dreams tonight. We'll wait till the next meeting for that. But no, I joke. We truly do want to accommodate as much as we possibly can, and I'd rather have all the pieces to the puzzle and figure out how they fit, and then be able to explain to you why we couldn't fit it in there and why we prioritized one thing over the other. I certainly owe that to these groups to go back to them.
And on the dog park note, this is almost something that we could stick in just about any open space, flat or terrained, anywhere in this park that we have left over too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that goes in. I think Monica hit some of that stuff on the head there of, with the terrain that's on the western part of that, there's going to be spaces where we can't do certain things, but at the same time, they have to fit together and be, adjacent to things that make the most sense. A Little League field right next to the dog park sounds great in theory, but do you really want people's dogs right next to little kids that don't know how to deal with dogs the best? There's certain things like that where we need to think through those adjacencies, but we certainly will, as we draw these pictures, try to figure out how to fit it in. And you're right, Nick, we can use some of those leftover, quote unquote, leftover spaces, if there are any, when we're done.
Is that a fairly deep ravine? It's kind of hard to tell from the contours, but that could be a really cool trail connection if we need to do like a bridge, like a small bridge or something over it.
Yep.
So we have to connect point A to B anyway.
It reminds me, I think, if those of you that looked at our proposals back in the day. We just did Hickory Glen Park over in Pleasant Hill. And there's a very similar ravine there that there's a bridge as a phase project as part of the trail system. There's soccer fields associated with it. We had similar discussion of soccer and softball, baseball with them. Very similar project to this, actually. So if you want to check that out, by all means, go check it out.
Bicyclists love bridges. They love to have their picture taken by bridges. So that's a cool thing. You've sort of responded already to the big issue that that I had and others had as part of community visioning of that, and that was having the trail go south of the school. So that's just fantastic news to hear that that is part of the plan now. I did want to ask you a question about the pond. How big is the pond, and does that pond allow for fish to be in it?
Good question. Haven't sized the pond, haven't really thought through it. To be quite honest, we may have to get into the details of the fields and figure out how much water we need in order to keep it full. You may have to size it from that point of view, but I'm guessing it's going to have to be at least a couple acres. And in order to do a pond like that, I would suggest that it's deep enough for fish. You're going to want to make it that way. If not, you're going to start to have algae problems and be hard to maintain. And there's still maintenance that goes along with a pond, but if we can plan it and put aerators in it and make it deep enough, it should be deep enough for fish. So absolutely.
Yeah, our partner JEO is going to be looking at it right now, and and until we have some things laid out and with impervious surfaces to add more to that runoff, they're going to just try and figure out how big a pond the watershed right now could support, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually one of the things we learned in this process. I mean, naturally, just looking at the grades, Monica being a civil engineer, it makes sense to put a body of water in that location. But in looking at it and understanding the water needs of the community and where, there's a future need for water towers and things like that, this particular area, we need the pond in order to get water there and to irrigate the fields that are there. So that's something that became, it was something of an idea. Can we have it as an amenity? Maybe it's a place to catch a fish or two, but now it's become more of a necessity for the fields. So we wouldn't have known that even a week ago.
Is that southwest corner of the site kind of where you're envisioning the main entrance coming into the park at too?
I think that's up for debate. I think depending upon who you talk to, I think both different parties have different thoughts on that. I think it kind of depends on how the road bisects the property or whether it does or not. I think there could be a cool option, again, speaking out loud without drawing it, where you kind of come in and you actually use the dam of the pond as sort of the entry. So you would drive over the pond to enter the sports complex over on the east side of it. I think there's ways we can accommodate that, and it might become a pretty cool feature of the park. And granted,
yeah, that's what I was wondering, if you can make it a feature that way.
We gotta have trails and we got to have other stuff, but let's make it something that's cool and exciting that makes it unique to Polk City.
We do also have wetlands down in that area.
Parks. We do have wetlands down there that we have to deal with. That's true.
If I can give a little bit of just feedback from things we've tried to work on in the past. Like we've talked about dog parks a lot. So, and we've pretty solidly had like people in the community really excited about it and homeowners adjacent to it not really excited about it. So I'm sure all that goes into play when you're working on it, but just to put that out there, we've tried to get it in other places, but just haven't been successful with finding the right spot in the community.
We've had those discussions on other projects. Totally understand. One of the benefits of this one is you're first. Like one of the reasons the city has the foresight to think through this. If we truly think there's a dog park here, it will be on a plan. Nat Properties can show everyone it's on a plan. If you buy a house there, you already know it's there. And I think it's a similar discussion when we get to the athletics discussion. It's fully anticipated these fields will have lights, whatever fields they are. They know that as well. That's another sticking point usually with neighbors. They want to make sure that we know that going in, but we in theory should be first. So anyway, sorry I interrupted.
No,
Continue
that's great. That's great. Another thing we've talked a lot about is trying to get just like a different play experience for kids in the community. So I think we've hit on that some already, but most of our community playgrounds have kind of the same set of static playground equipment. And so I don't think anybody here is probably would be too excited about repeating that, you know, but how do we get a different play experience for kids?
Mhm.
And we talked about that a little bit already, you know, with if it's a nature playground or water features or things, but trying not to just put in those big, huge play structures that we have in lots of other places in the community that people can already access. And then I would just add another thing that I don't know that we've been super successful at is like creating very accessible play spaces or parks. I think we have done the requirements, but it, you know, and there's a lot of space between do the requirements and have a fully come from miles around inclusive play area. But if we could try to be more intentional about some of those features, not just on the play area, but on the other features in the park too, I think that would really be a benefit of that we don't have for families in our community right now.
Mhm.
You know, you said dream, and this was brought up during community visioning, and that was this concept of having a pickleball court out there, and as being something that all generations could appreciate about that park, not just soccer and baseball, but, you know, all ages of people could enjoy.
Yeah, I think that's certainly several groups have mentioned having some sort of pickleball court in that location.
Do they take up much space? I don't have any experience. I just heard they're a great thing, but do they take up a lot of space or tennis court size?
They're not that big, but
No, they're not.
they
The best comparison that I can give you is they're almost the exact same dimensions as a volleyball court.
Yeah.
Oh, so they're not big at all, not large. You could have lots of pickleball courts.
yeah, I go to the downtown Y, and on Saturday mornings they have 2 or 3 courts set up crossways across the basketball courts.
Mhm. So yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely something we've heard. Again, I think it becomes priorities once we get down to it, but I think we owe it to show some locations where that could be for sure. And if not, I mean, we're not looking at every single park, but I think we have been to them all. If we can't fit them here, there might be a suggestion or something we could say, okay, we think maybe it fits here, that we can help Jason figure that out. But I'm just looking at the sheer numbers of the things we've heard in the last week of things that everybody wants to put in the park. We have to be realistic about what it is, but I also want to be realistic of helping Jason develop the plan for all of them. And if there's another place that something fits, and this is just an example, it could be any of these things. If it fits somewhere else and we think it might be something, we'll talk about that. You know, as the plan evolves, maybe this fits better in this park or that park. So even if we don't end up putting it here, we should have a plan for something like that. And it may still fit here, I don't know.
And you said that you've met with a lot of groups, and I know you have. But what are like the soccer groups and baseball, softball groups thinking of in terms of the amount of space that they would like to see utilized on this acreage, and it's 57 acres, whatever it is?
The short answer is, and Jim, correct me if I get these numbers wrong, but essentially softball, baseball wanted to have 4 of each, roughly sizes 4 of each, so 8 total fields long-term. Again, I've asked them to dream, right? And then soccer themselves, I don't remember the exact number of fields, but it was around 23 acres worth of flat space that they were looking for.
Right.
So that's almost half of it, just for soccer?
Doing the math, yes, that's almost half of it, but it's probably more than that because making that whole space flat's probably not realistic. You know, just thinking of the grades that are out there. To get 23 acres of flat space, we're going to eat up 35 acres to get the grade right to make it enough for the 23. And then you add in the big balls and each of those 2 things. They're not all going to fit. Just as a point of perspective.
I'm sorry, you broke up there. You added.
Which is why I think we need to consider. Oh, I said just as if we try to add both of those things there, if we need 23, which becomes more than that, and we need 8 baseball, softball fields, those things, even just those things aren't going to fit on that space. which is why we mentioned earlier that we need to kind of look at the core ground and what can stay there, or how can that get improved in long term. We just have to think through what fits, and just giving you some perspective of how big some of those pieces are, which is what you asked for, Steve. It's a tough job, but that's why you hired us. We have to figure out what the priorities are.
One other thing worth mentioning, I think, is anything we can do to try to preserve some of the natural features as much as we can. I know a lot of people, including myself, moved here because we love the proximity to, some of these other natural parks, Jester, Big Creek, and the trails, of course. So anything we can do to try to preserve kind of that feel, because I know people do get a little tired of all the housing development that's happening and just, seeing trees getting cut down left and right to accommodate things. So I don't know if there's any way to maintain that feel, or maybe plan on some additional trees being planted to kind of bring back that natural feel, and maybe some soft surface walking trails or something that's a little less intrusive, and maybe would appeal to all ages would be nice to see too, I think.
Yeah, I think in looking at this space and walking the space, that one might be a little more difficult. Just knowing the program, what we have. And I mean, luckily you're right. The proximity you have to Big Creek and Saylorville and all the other amenities that makes Polk City awesome. Agreed. I just don't know that this is that space. Just in walking it and knowing what we need to do there, and knowing the existing vegetation that's there and where it's at, I don't know how we're going to save a whole lot of it, but I do agree with you on your idea of replanting. And, let's take a hint from nature and, look at the soils that are there. Let's figure out the slopes. Let's, the extra areas that Nick mentioned, some of those can be that, we can replant those. We can make that kind of seem, for the next 100 years. Let's plant trees in the regular property. It has the ability to say we're going to save all these trees and have these cool woodlands trails, because there just aren't that many of them on the site, or there isn't much.
I will tell you, Matt, every once in a while you do cut out, and I can see everybody else's head kind of lean in. So I do know that it's on your side and not our side.
Okay.
But I want to kind of piggyback off of what Monica is saying. I am the mom of 3 little girls, all of which who are exceedingly active in sports. And I'm also married to a varsity softball coach and PE teacher. So I spend approximately 90% of my not at home life at sports fields. And I would love, if there is any way possible, to save some of the trees near the sports fields to be maintained, because I can't tell you how many times I've been to fields and there's no shade at the fields and it's miserable hot. Again, I don't exactly know how that lays out on the space, but I do know that there are some larger trees there that are in existence, and I just don't know if it's possible to save some of those bigger trees and integrate them into the sports field spaces.
Yeah, I greatly appreciate your thoughts, and I feel your pain. I've been in those same places. We just got done, I think, we just did Triumph Park for Waukee, and we built in shade structures, we planted trees, we tried to do all those different things. But knowing trees aren't going to grow that fast. So we artificially put some shade structures in to accomplish that. And I think we're going to have to do that here too. The reality of carving in flat space and where we need flat space and putting it in a proximity to where those trees are is probably unlikely. I mean, certainly we can do our best. Just the reality tells me it's going to be a really tough chore on this particular piece of property. So artificially, we will have to probably supplement that in the short term with canopy structures and things like that. And then absolutely plant trees for long-term gain so that we can figure out how to do that. And then it also helps, if you put them in the right spot, it helps with those errant foul balls and things like that too. So certainly see the value in it.
And I know it'll be hard. You told us to dream, and I'm dreaming of the Lorax at the end instead of the beginning. So I'd much rather have natural shade mechanisms instead of artificial structures, but I do know that there are limits. So.
Yep, agreed.
Matt, I had a question about the trail that runs south of the school. You remember in our other conversation with community vision, we talked about having a trailhead. And what I'm wondering is, with the school putting the trail in south that runs over to North Third, does that also include the potential for, I think we talked before about a parking area there? Can you go through those trees and that? Did you talk at all about that with them? I wonder.
I think that's sort of the next step of knowing that the trail goes through there. We didn't, you know, admittedly, I didn't look through the lens when I was on site of what that particular property looked like. I think we need to evaluate what it looks like. And then also, I don't know what agreements Jason's made with the property owners to get through there, you know, because I don't know if the school owns all of that, or we just need to look into the logistics of it. But absolutely, I think that, you know, it could be a location for it if the grades and those things allow. Because I do think, as I told you in the last meeting, there are some complications of a trailhead and a sports complex right next to each other, just purely by the fact that that parking is going to get eaten up by people that you don't want to park there. If you're on your bike on a Saturday, you want to go biking and you pull up to the parking lot and there's nowhere to park, that's frustrating. So we need to be careful of the proximity of those things. But, you know, like, I think there's ways, maybe there's terrain, maybe it's in a remote corner of the park. I don't know what the answer is, but we're here to test it. But I think looking even off property of what the right location is, maybe it is down by 3rd Street. I think we owe it, because we, you know, it's in your plan. It's something the community wants and needs. We owe it to figure out a solution for it.
Do we have any idea what the school is thinking about for parking and where they're planning to site their parking on there? Because that might be a double duty thing as well.
Yeah, Jim, can you pull that?
Up in like Slater, where they have what is essentially the school faculty parking right next to the trailhead there in Slater.
Yeah, so this shows, if you can see this, oh, thanks, Jim. So that's actually the plan for the school. We got that from them. So the unfortunate part for us is it's clear kind of on the other side, and there's a big detention basin on the south side. So this dashed line you see down here on the very south side of it, I'm moving my cursor and you can't see it. That makes no difference. Thanks, Jim. That's where the trail alignment is. So it's kind of disconnected from the school the way it is now. So I don't know that that actually works. And then also, if you look at the grade there, the grade is substantially higher on the uphill side to the right. If you look at where the parking is, it's almost a 20-foot hill up to that location, if you look at those contours. So probably not the most convenient for what you're suggesting, but certainly a good idea.
Later. I wasn't sure if this was accurate for what they wanted to do.
Yep, they've shared that with us. And then we had some further discussions of the area in between there, and they didn't really have any plans. They were willing to at least discuss how that area evolves in between there, and maybe there's some short-term use that we could do of flattening it out and doing that sort of stuff. But then that all talks about who's paying for grading on whose site and all that kind of stuff too. But they allowed us to have the freedom to think about that space too. They didn't say that we couldn't touch it, or that's part of that road alignment discussion that we had too, of does the road need to go through or does it not? They were willing to entertain anything we came up with. Wouldn't say yes or no to anything, but certainly willing to have a further discussion, which is positive in my mind.
Where's the school's play area going to be? I mean, would they be building any ball fields?
Sorry, guys. I'm on the internet, buddy. I gotta go. Sorry.
No worries. I get it.
Yeah. Does anybody want a chocolate muffin? He was being nice.
Sign me up, bud. Does he deliver? Can he drive yet?
Well, it actually is my birthday. He was trying to be super nice, but
happy birthday.
We will leave him alone at this point. But what was the question? I got sidetracked. I'm very sorry.
No worries. I was just wondering if the school had any plans for that, like for doing their own ball fields or recreation space for recess, those kinds of things in that space.
We did have a conversation about potentially a shared playground in the space, but it's just sort of like the playground for them when the school is clear on the west side. To put the playground clear on the east side is a nightmare for teachers, just trying to manage that. And then also the giant slope that's there. I don't really see a way of sort of sharing those spaces at this point. I mean, I think they're going to have their playgrounds probably going to be more towards the west side. And quite honestly, if we think about sports complexes, as a kid of a, the little one there that you just saw, and I also have a 13-year-old. I've done the balancing act of one's playing the game and the other one's running around. You kind of need the proximity to those things to make sense too, so you can sort of manage both and still catch part of the game. I'm guessing you guys have done that too. So we find that the sports complexes almost need their own little playground of some sort. So my guess is, depending upon how sports lays out, there'll probably be a small playground by it somewhere, and then potentially another one, that's more natural idea, that's handicap accessible. Not that they all probably should be handicap accessible as we're going to do this, but I would guess that the sum of all this is I don't think there's probably going to be the best case to share a use of a playground, which we certainly have done. We've got lots of examples where we've done that, but the way this all lays out, I think it's difficult.
I can share my dreams for Polk City Recreation now. I would say that I picture Polk City having a rec center, that we have better trails, that we have more unique parks, like has been mentioned. I would love for us to have a pool. I would love for us to have a splash pad. My one concern with putting a splash pad at this area is how you said you have your sporting activities happening and your younger siblings, that I'm imagining a lot of little kids unattended in water situations. But yeah, and then just maximizing the space for fields for both soccer and softball and baseball. And just, like, along with the more unique park opportunities, I like the areas that have the musical parks. I think that is a fun, different thing that isn't really common in our area. And if that was part of a butterfly garden area or somewhere more natural, just the around the pond, like a path that you can go and just go around the pond again and again with your kids on bikes or rollerblades, places like that where you're not having to worry about traffic. Yeah, I think that's most of them that I have.
I think we can accommodate most of those. The one that I'm curious that you said was rec center. Curious your definition of rec center. That's another one of those that everybody defines differently.
Yeah, my definition of rec center would be the regular fitness equipment, gym space that you can shoot hoops that other groups could use. You could have a room that you could rent for, family things like that. So it would be kind of all encompassing, kind of like a gym, but that we could have, youth programming there and things like that.
I'm curious about the rest of the group's opinion on that particular topic. Sorry, Kelly, I need to know.
That's fine.
I know I don't want to create enemies here, but I think that's one of those things that's a fairly large piece that we've heard from a lot of different groups. It's not just your thoughts. We certainly have heard that from others. I'm just curious of the definition of what that is. And your definition is common, I've heard that. But those can be, pretty massive, and they can be kind of just enough for a meeting space. And then obviously the room that you guys normally meet in there in the middle of town, that serves a lot of purposes right now. And that space is going to need to grow, and the fire department or somebody's going to want to take over that space. And let's be honest, it's not the most accessible place in the world either. There's, the difference between a senior center and a community center and a rec center, it grows as you talk about those three things. So as I define space and we talk about what can fit here, that's what I'm trying to define when I ask that question. And what you described is probably the biggest of the three, which is fine. And I don't disagree with you. Growing communities certainly have needs for that. So just curious of the rest of the group's thoughts.
So I made a plug for a community room, a rentable style community room, something similar to what we've got downtown, but possibly larger during the community vision meeting. And one point I didn't get across there is the one downtown we use for voting, and it's kind of a terrible space.
Yep, we heard that.
So yeah, having done the election this last term, I don't want to have to use that space long term, especially as the community grows. Terrible parking down there. It's one door in and out that everybody was going in and out, and I can almost guarantee we were over capacity during the big rush times.
Mhm. No other nods? Do I have to like do the whole raise your hand thing when I
Well,
say what it is?
I think it's safe to say that I know that the city council is looking at a facilities plan study for its space. And, you know, I don't know what all the parameters are for that downtown, but I doubt there's a gym included in that, or,
Mhm.
you know, something that large. So, you know, gymnasium is something totally different from the senior center.
Yep, definitely true.
The one thing I'll say about a gym per se is, I think the school's already planning on putting in a full-size gym in the new school there. And from what Dr. Mart made it sound like was like full gym, stands, everything. So almost similar to what you would see in a high school or an upper middle school. So,
Mhm.
you know, you pick up a few basketball courts there, you pick up some meeting space. You know, if push come to shove, you know, when it comes to voting, Nick, you know, all the voting in Alleman's done at the middle school. I mean, it's right there
And that
in a
would be
school.
great.
So if we could keep, you know, find arrangements with the schools to utilize some of that space, you know, twice every 3-4 years for elections, you know, maybe that kind of opens up some of that. But you know, knowing the schools putting in more gym space, to me would kind of solve that problem. I get the idea of having some more community rooms for hosting parties or hosting different things, but you know, if the school's going to that expense, I'd like to use our funds somewhere else. But that's just my 2 cents.
I'm definitely going to be the opposite voice of what Josh just said. I actually am much more in favor of having a community facility of some sort. I do understand what Josh is saying, but then that space is not available at all during the day. And the school would always have priority. So as I'm thinking about what we have discussed for Parks and Rec and offering more programming for both the oldest members of our community and the youngest members of our community, that school gym space would still not resolve those issues that are out there for those members of the community, because school would be in session during those times. And as I think about my position on the Parks Board specifically, I do worry that there could be a very strong perception that this is just another park for the young people and the sports in our community. And like Monica was saying, you know, her family may not use a ton of sports facilities, but a nature path might be a more access. And I feel that way about a community center as well. If it's a multi-purpose facility, you know, I don't know if there's the possibility of starting smaller and then, you know, having it basically be a gym space that can then be expanded upon. I guess I don't actually know what all of that looks like. And obviously we're talking about big plans down the road, but you know, there isn't somewhere for older folks to go for a walk in the winter, for an example. There isn't somewhere for little kids to get out and just have a place to do gross motor type activities in the winter. And there's nowhere for Jason or anyone else to offer classes, camps, clubs during the summer. And so I think about that in a more long-term way, about the building being kind of like the Parks and Rec hub, for a lack of better description. So I think about it less as a gym space and more as like what Kelly was describing as like a facility is how I perceive the community part of things.
I think a perfect spot for that, Ashley, would be on that green space on 3rd and Davis, right in the middle of town, easy for everybody in town, the south side, the north side, everybody to get to. I think that'd be a perfect facility space for that specifically. But you know, Matt, I don't know if you mentioned it or if it came up in one of your other meetings. Somebody mentioned it in our Little League meeting that, and maybe Jason, you can, confirm this or not, but I heard somewhere that the average age of Polk City residents dropped from like 56 to 30, mid 30s within the last 10 or so years. Is that accurate? Are we able to confirm that? I mean, I get your point and the point of needing to focus on all ages, but if the average age of town has really dropped that much, that's a huge difference too, to take into consideration on what we want to put into this land.
The average age is 36, Josh.
Yeah, that I was dumbfounded when I had heard that. I mean, I've lived in town my whole life, and I don't know if it's ever been that low.
I'm sure it hasn't. I'm sure it hasn't. Yeah, I think there's two things I guess I'll say. Is one of them is this isn't a plan for this year or next year. That community center may be 20 years away before you have the capacity to build it, but you got to reserve the space when you're doing it. So as we master plan that, and maybe the spot you're talking about on whatever that spot is, maybe we need to think about that. But I'm only asking the question to reserve the space, because as we put these pieces together, we want to make sure the plan gets right. This is the plan for the next 50, 100 years, and you're going to build this over a series of years. We're going to help you figure out the cost, figure out how to phase it, all that sort of stuff. But we have to reserve the space now. So, I guess I understand Ashley's point. I understand your point, Josh. And I mean, it's going to be tough when we get down to it. This is the conversation everybody gets to dream. This is the easy part. The next series of meetings we have is the hard part, where we have to start talking about what fits where. It's tough. It really is. And we're all going to have tough conversations, and Ashley and Josh just disagreed slightly. It's going to get worse. That's just part of the deal. And it's okay. We will all get through it.
I think one thing to add to that is I totally agree. There needs to be some sort of indoor community and recreation space somewhere. I don't know if it has to be at this site, because it already sounds like that the site's highly spoken for with all these other needs. And plus, I don't know, buildings are expensive. So I don't know what the city's willing to stomach with budget for this project, but buildings can really I think, for instance, Ankeny, I know, is doing their senior center. I think that's like $6 or $7 million. So that can be a pretty price tag, but they are doing indoor pickleball courts. So maybe that's something you could think about at the indoor facility if that ever comes to fruition.
Dual purpose, right?
Yeah.
No. And I guess the other thing I was going to say is in thinking about this, I think I've cautioned everybody, no matter what we do, the first phase of a parks project, a lot of times doesn't seem like a park yet. And when I say that is we know this site today, it's a hill, it's farmed, it's got undulation to it. In order to get fields and community center spaces, the grading and utilities and earthwork and pond and all that sort of.
We lost you, Matt. Matt, we totally lost you. We can't hear a thing you're saying. I will tell you what Matt is trying to say is that a lot of times the grading and other components that go into preparing the ground leaves you with a giant wide open green space without a lot of amenities. But sometimes that's the most expensive and time consuming part, is just getting the land prepared. And therefore you end up with a plan that has multiple phases that can be rolled out over a 10, 15, 20 year process. But if we don't get this 20-year plan on paper and don't reserve the particular spaces for what are our needs, then it won't happen as they prepare the land. So, I think going back to your question, Monica, and obviously you're a civil engineer, I'm telling you something that you've gone to school for 5 years for, but, I think that the biggest thing about this meeting that we need to continue to remember is that this is our dream for Parks and Rec. And so I think one thing that both Matt and Jim said over and over again at the initial stakeholder meeting was, don't provide a caveat to what you're saying. This is your dream, and it's your dream for the stakeholder from which you're speaking presently. So even though Nick and Josh and Steve have all been a part of these stakeholder meetings, from a different perspective. Right now, you're speaking from the Parks and Rec perspective. So you may even contradict yourself, knowing what your needs are from the Parks and Rec lens versus what your needs would be from as a biker, for an example, or as, you know, a baseball coach or whatever the case may be. So just keep in mind that you're speaking from the perspective of what do you want your dreams Park and Rec opportunities to be, and knowing that this space may be a location for some of those dreams to come to fruition.
I think you should work for us. That was well said.
I work in education. I'm really
sorry.
good at talking politics around people.
There's also a
I
direct
will
correlation
say that-
of keeping your kid away. Like I just told them to hop off the internet right before my kid rolled in so that my internet would work better. And then I'm sure he's back on the internet now, which is why he's not in here. So anyway, that was well done. And I agree, that's exactly right. But the one thing we haven't talked about and that we have to talk about, and I know we technically only have 5 minutes, but I'm willing to stay as long as need be. We haven't talked about sports yet. And it's obviously a big component of this. Josh and his group talked a lot about it. The soccer folks talked a lot about it. I guess, you know, if you guys had to prioritize, again, Ashley did a great job of introducing this, but the hat that you're wearing now is what's best for the community, not what's best for soccer or what's best for baseball, softball. If you guys had to pick, you know, the parameters we have are tough. The space just isn't available. You know, if they told us they needed 23 acres for just soccer, and you need a 2-acre pond, and we know we need to grade it, we know we need a community center, and we know we need a splash pad. If you throw those 5 things out there, there's not enough room for baseball, softball, and vice versa. If you put baseball, softball out there, there's not enough room for soccer. So as we have to prioritize things, there's going to be tough decisions had. So I guess I'm just curious from your perspectives of, you know, how do you look at that? And, you know, does it make sense to refurbish core land that you don't own, or switch that to one sport and move a different sport out here? If so, which one is it? I'm challenging you guys to think about that in maybe a different way than you have before.
I don't think it makes sense to refurbish necessarily the core land. I think the way that works right now is we don't see a whole, maybe Josh, I'm wrong, but we don't see a ton of overlap between when soccer's using it and when baseball, softball's using it. But if we could break out some of each to a different location at any given time, it's going to free up congestion down there. So I envision us putting a little bit of both at this new park, but certainly not dedicating all or even half of it to being a big sports complex.
I would say Saturday mornings, there's a huge congestion down there when soccer plays and baseball, softball plays. You know, baseball have games every 90 minutes, starting at 8, going all the way till about 1:30. And I think soccer plays throughout the day. Softball does the same times as baseball. So that's the one time there's a big conflict with space. And really the conflict is more parking and safety. You know, you guys have all been down there. You go down all the way to the end, you either have to back all the way out or hope you can pull into a spot and 10-point turn to get back out. So it's really unsafe there. You've got the concession stand and the playground all on one side. So you have kids darting across the street between the cars. So it's really kind of a safety issue. The city's done a great job these last couple of years painting lines, so you actually can have spaces and it maximizes the number of cars you can get in there. But it is a big, you know, safety and congestion on a Saturday morning. The rest of the time, it's not as bad. As far as congestion, usually it's more soccer practices in the weekday evenings, but softball, baseball have games 6 days a week out there. I think I've said it before, I'd be open to putting one sport on one set of ground versus the other. You know, speaking from the baseball, softball size, you know, we've got 4 fields, 3 that are readily usable. One is if we have to, we can use it, or we use it for practice. All the T-ball kids for the baseball side have to practice someplace outside of there. All other practices have to happen on a Sunday afternoon and a Sunday evening. There is no time for baseball, softball practices throughout the week, except for one field that softball primarily uses and gets a couple practices in an evening. But all the baseball are stuck on a Sunday afternoon because of just the sheer number of teams that we have. There's always a home game. We didn't have a season last year. If I go back to the 19 season, between Monday and Friday, I want to say there were 8 nights through the whole season that we could put a practice on a weekday night. Just because there's always games down there on at least 3 of the fields. And like I said, softball practices on one of the far back adult softball fields. So, you know, there's a need for space. The average age of 36 in town means there's a lot more kids in town. Looking at the plat map that Jim was hosting, that shows up to 200 plus more houses coming in. You know, if that trend stays with a 36 age, you know, bring in 2 kids for 250 houses, there's 500 more kids split between soccer and baseball and softball. At those younger ages, a lot of them play both. And so, you know, although we're having a down year for Little League this year with COVID and not having a season last year, 2 years ago, we had 360 kids between baseball, softball. And you bring in another 500 kids into town, not to mention all the other little pockets of developments of 50, 60 houses, you know, you're pushing 600, 700 more kids. And, you know, you're really going to eliminate any opportunity to have recreation, baseball, softball, if we just don't have the field space.
And to add to that, from like the parent side and having multiple kids in sports, it gets to be a lot just to manage. Like, this kid has practice at this field and this one has it at this field, or this game or here and that game or there. That if it was, you know, not, I don't like the idea of like, well, you're at the old place and you're at the new place, but yeah, at the same time, if it was just softball, baseball, and soccer, that if your family tends to do one sport, you know that this is where we're going for this and this is where we're going for that. And it does help with some of that congestion and parking lot traffic, that you're not pulling in and out, you know, real quick to get a kid and then take someone somewhere else. So that's just kind of my thoughts on it. Would be nice if, you know, games and practices, you just knew that you're not always communicating the north field or the south field or this field.
I come at this from a little different perspective. I know we talk about the average age being 36 years old, and I'm a few decades older than that. And but my set of people who are either about to retire, who are retired, are not slowing down. So we enjoy a lot of the same things as people who are younger than we are enjoy, which would include trails and includes gym space too. I mean, I was just at a function prior to coming here where one of the gentlemen said he had just gotten back from Merle Hay Mall because that's the only place for him to walk indoors in the wintertime. Now, does that mean that we can have a big community center there with a gym? I don't know, but it does mean that we can address some of those issues by having a complete walking trail for the months when people can walk outdoors that would circle that entire complex. I think that would, you know, allow for kind of a major walk. Is that in the plan at all, to take the trail all the way around that 57-acre site?
I think the terrain's going to tell us some of that. I mean, I think there's going to be a trail system throughout the site one way or another. Will it be like a complete loop that has, you know, hey, this is 3/4 of a mile or this, you know, whatever? I kind of doubt it's that perfect, but there certainly will be walkable trail connections throughout the space. And they need to be separate. We need to be careful too of the high trestle connection bike trail we need to be very careful of where that goes through in comparison to these walking trails and in comparison to the sports complex. You know, the last thing you want to do is encounter bikers that want to go from point A to point B when you're trying to stand around and watch a game, or, you know, you're out for a casual walk. That traffic, you know, the conflict points of that, we're going to have some somewhere, but we need to be careful of how those interact. But to answer your question, Steve, yes, I think we should have something that gets folks most of the way around the park. Can I say it's a perfect oval and ring the park? No, but we will absolutely have some trail system through it. So one other thing to consider on the sports discussion, just to toss it out there, you guys talked about growing and being able to do, you know, all the extra houses Josh mentioned. You're right, it shows 210 lots right now. You're going to keep growing. I mean, that's part of why you're having this plan. And as you think about sports complexes, and I think Kelly said, you know, separating the two, at some point you're going to outgrow, you know, even what we're talking about right now, you're going to outgrow again. So trying to think through not your needs today or tomorrow, and thinking about 15 years from now or 20 years from now, you know, there's going to be some pain built in there as you get there. But we're making a decision for the long term. We're not making a decision for what fixes things next Tuesday and makes the parking lot better, you know, a year from now. We need to do those things too, but also thinking through what that long-term goal is. And, you know, you look at the Ankeneys of the world, they just bit the bullet, so to speak, and built everything at once and merged it all together, and it worked, but they're out of space again. Like we just did their plan. They need to build a whole nother Prairie Ridge at this point. There is a different approach of, you know, the approach that we went through with Hickory Glen. By the time we got that project done, the baseball, softball folks were advocating to build soccer at the new facility. And, you know, they were happy to leave soccer and kick them out of the current space, and they're going to redo the existing facility to be all baseball, softball. That made them happy. So we have two ends of the spectrum here, but the point is thinking long-term about it and how you can grow into those spaces. And if there's, you know, a temporary solution for one sport or the other, or do you go ahead and merge them in this new location where it's, you know, kind of halfway fixes everything now, and then you sort of halfway fix everything again. There's different ways to look at it. So as we come back, there's certainly going to be different options that you need to weigh, and we'll let you see what they look like, right? It's our job to draw them and talk about them. But it's a tough decision for sure.
So I have a question of clarification, I guess, mostly more for Josh. Were you guys looking at, for the 8 fields that you want to site at this location, were you looking at that in addition to keeping the fields you already have at the core land? Or were you thinking that these 8 fields would satisfy your needs for the foreseeable future?
I think ideally the thought I had was we'd end up splitting soccer and softball, some soccer and Little League. One would be at one spot over the other. I think for the foreseeable future, you know, it would be 8 fields at a minimum. You know, if we're talking 15, 20 years, you know, that might be a different story. You know, think in the next 5 to 10 years, 8 fields I think is pretty good. You know, right now we don't see more than, you know, 2 fields per weeknight for games. And so if you had that set up, you'd still have 2 fields for baseball, 2 fields for softball, to still be able to have practices during the week and not have to use up a full Sunday, which is also going up against competition ball as well. So I think the 8 was what we thought we would be able to last us for a considerable amount of time.
Nick, that's my fault. I should have clarified that. I mean, that was pretty clear from their group.
I wasn't sure if then soccer would be able to reclaim some of the land from the current ball fields that are there at the Army Corps land now.
Yeah, I mean, if we were to put an 8-plex, you know, 2 quads out there, then yeah, you reuse what material you can. Probably not a whole heck of a lot, but yeah, flatten all that out and regrade it for soccer. Absolutely.
Yep. Sure. Wasn't sure about keeping the ball field infrastructure there going forward. So.
No, and again, I'll take the blame for this. This was when we asked the question of both of those groups. It was, how many in total do you need? And then it's for us sort of to refigure out, you know, what pieces fit where. And And we wanted to think about, decent growth. We can't plan for, the expansion. If there's 20 more of these 200 and some lot ones, we're not going to meet all the needs for that, but we're trying to do the best we can for the foreseeable future. And both soccer and softball, baseball gave us really good answers on what those futures would be. Soccer actually gave us a whole diagram. Like we have a drawing that somebody was very meticulous on laying out for us. But the reality of it is that drawing's like 1,000 foot by 1,000 foot square. This site will never get us 1,000 by 1,000 foot square. It just won't happen, just for the grading that we have to do. So it is what it is. But we have the information, and it's been very helpful. Any other thoughts? Amy, are you still there? Oh, she is.
I am, yeah. Thanks for checking in, but I don't think I have anything to add on this part.
Well, I think I told the other groups I had a whole list deck of cards sitting there that everybody could grab, because I don't want this to be the last time you talk to us. We've had several people actually kind of write thoughts afterwards that sent us emails that we've got on file and can certainly reference as we start designing. So the same offer goes for all of you. Somebody there has our contact information. Happy to talk to you, share your thoughts. My cell phone's even on there. You can text me, I don't care. I'd be happy to get your thoughts and incorporate them. But I greatly appreciate the help, and then we are really excited about it. I know some of this discussion sounds daunting, and the fact that I keep talking about how many pieces are fitting here, we will find the right answer. I mean, we will find a group of things that fit, the right collection of things that fit, that make sense for the community. And if all the pieces don't fit and we need to say, hey, in 20 years or 10 years or 2 years, whatever the answer is, they need to use the space on 3rd Street, or they need to find another spot for softball. I don't know what the answer is, but we need to find that answer for you by the time we're done. And we may not tell you where it's at, but we need to say these pieces all fit here and you need 12 acres somewhere else. I don't know, but we're certainly going to help you through that.
I have a question on kind of the timeline when you have worked with communities. So we are in the very early planning stages now. What is the earliest we could expect to have some, action over there? I know all the groundwork will take a long time, but it's hard to imagine, like when we moved here 7 years ago, our girls were a lot littler and I was so excited, like, we're going to get a splash pad in this community. It'll be great. Well, now 7 years has passed. They're not necessarily splash pad age anymore, or by the time one comes, they'd be the big kids that no one would want playing there. So it's hard to, to imagine, like, I still want that for our community, but like for the people who don't have kids playing soccer or softball or baseball yet, well, in 5 years, when this would finally come to fruition, you may have that.
Yep, I think that's absolutely a fair question. I don't know that I can answer it. The city had the foresight to get the property. They've asked us to come up with a plan. Ultimately, our plan is going to get used to help create that vision. The city's going to talk about how they fund it. We're going to talk about phasing. So just the pieces that you're talking about right there of, what happens and what can we do first. I think Ashley very eloquently explained what I couldn't, because I was getting blocked from my own computer, but figuring out how to phase those things in sometimes is difficult, because those first couple phases don't look like park stuff, but we certainly have to think through that. There's lots of different ways to get there. There's grants we can apply for. The fact that Jason's on staff now and helping push that is another positive sign. But really, this is that first step. I don't know that we can tell you exactly, but the intention is to give you the tools, and then also figure out how the right collection of items can help you maybe get a bond path. What are the options once we get there? And then I think you have willing folks that want things to happen. And then we have to turn it back over to you guys and let it happen. And then as far as Jim and I are concerned, we build parks as well. As fast as you guys can vote for it or get the money for it, we're happy to help you get it built and push the contractors and those sort of things. But that's a different topic. We're still on the master plan phase at this point. But I do think this is absolutely the right process and the right steps. Experience tells me that, like the Hickory Glen project, we started off the same exact way. We gave you some pretty pictures. It's amazing the momentum that it generates. But you also have to have positive vibes in the community. You know, that's why we meet with all these groups. And I truly don't want to put one group against the other. That's the worst thing that can happen, because then you're going to kill the project. Somehow we have to figure out a way to weave this all together and have all of you be ambassadors for whatever we come up with. And that's probably the fastest way to get things moving. And then obviously Chelsea and Jason and others with the city are going to have to help push things and keep it moving. That was a long way to not answer your question. I'm sorry. Jim, you haven't talked a whole lot. I knew I was going to talk a lot, but do you have anything to add?
You're doing a great job. No, just, you know, following up on what you were just saying. I mean, that's the process. I mean, we're going to generate something now that plans the property and gives a roadmap for Jason to get capital improvement projects you know, into the budget with the city council. And then we go with that timeline and that phasing plan to start picking out things to get into real design. So it's kind of hard to say what is going to come first, but as we see what develops on the ground in our plan, then we can figure out a way to phase those that makes the most sense construction wise and long term, how to, you know, get the funding in place for that to happen.
All right, well, thank you, Matt and Jim. This is everybody's last warning. Does anybody have any last things that they would like to add?
Happy birthday, Matt.
Yeah, happy
Thank you.
birthday.
I can go have that chocolate muffin now.
Yes, enjoy.
We would sing you happy birthday,
No,
but
please don't.
I am on the call and that would be a punishment. So we're going to go ahead and skip that. But that said, I do have both Matt and Jim's cards here at my house, and I know Jason does as well. If anybody thinks of anything at the last minute, I would just encourage each and every one of you to get those written down in email and send them Jason's way, and Jason will go ahead and forward them to Jim and Matt, only because that might streamline everybody's lives a little bit from getting contact information. But they are with Confluence. You can find them online as well. Both of their email addresses are on the Confluence website as well. So thank you both so much for coming this evening. Do you have any last minute things for us before we excuse you?
No.
Now the fun begins.
Yep. I was just going to say, the exciting part's just getting ready to start.
Well, thank you again for your time tonight. Enjoy your evening.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jason.
Do we have a report, Jason, from our council liaison?
No, I need to reach out to him and make sure he knows he's our council liaison, I think. So, yeah, I will do that. And then I had 3 real quick little quips, and I don't want to keep you guys too much longer.
Yeah, go ahead. I sent out an email. Amy might not be able to get back on.
Sure. So starting today, March 1st, our rental facilities are now open and we are accepting reservations. We did do a pretty extensive COVID-19 protocol to get that approved. So essentially, both at Miller Park Shelter House and the community center, masks required when social distancing is not available. And the max occupancy of the community center is 40 people for the foreseeable future. And Miller Park Shelter House will be 20 for the foreseeable future. It's pretty consistent with what other municipalities are doing in the metro and able to utilize those spaces. So I have been reaching out to all those folks that showed interest over the winter months, and we're starting to take rentals. Adult yoga begins tomorrow night at 7 p.m. So this is the first month we're offering it. So folks sign up for the month. That gets you 4 nights of yoga. So I'm pretty happy. We had 11 of 12 spots full for March. So, and we did have 12 of 12, but somebody had to cancel. So good start. And the last bit is summer programs. I'm working most of my days on those, and I'm wanting to publish some sort of program guide, probably digital, by 3/19 or sooner. I'm really starting to get approached by folks wanting to see, the summer rec program come back. A few things I'll say about that is, and I've shared with you guys before, one of the first things I shared with you about a year ago was the cost analysis of that was not great, and it needed some attention to really be a sustainable program. So that, coupled with COVID really kind of restricting sizes and travel, things like that, it will look different this year. And I don't have all of the final details yet. They're very close. But no, there will be some sort of summer fun camp or some other cute name to be determined that will kind of fill that need. And yeah, that I'd like that to be out by March 19th or sooner, so folks can start planning their summer accordingly. But yeah, other than that, it's going to be more than that program. I'm doing other things that are achievable in a COVID-19 world. So I'm excited for the stuff we finally get to do program-wise. And 2021 will look light compared to future years when COVID's a thing of the past, knock on wood, and we can just be, full throttle. So yeah, that's kind of what's going on my end. So that's all I got for you, though.
Sorry, I'm on mute. All right, thank you, Jason. Any questions for Jason? All right, and Jason, do we have some sort of announcement to get like summer programming? If people want to offer summer programming, is that available online or somewhere, or do you just reach out to people?
What do you mean by offer summer programming?
You said that you were going to put out a summer programming guide. Is that just what you're offering, or is that what other people are offering?
No, so sorry, the verbiage, we were on the same lane, but going a different direction there, Ashley. No, so what I'm proposing to publish would be entirely in-house. It would be Polk City Parks and Recreation programs. I think down the road, when that program guide develops a little bit more, there may be an opportunity for, if Little League wants a half page, soccer wants half a page, the sailing school wants a half a page. I think there's an opportunity to kind of do a little cross promotion there, but initially this first one will just be entirely in-house, as I'm just trying to get it out as quickly as possible.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Anything else for the good of the cause? All right, I need a motion and a second to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Nope, I'll second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. All right, thank you everybody for some extended time tonight. We will see you again on April 5th.